Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Innovative Revenue Leader podcast. This is another session focused on a new report that Varicent released called Building the Compounding Growth, what 150 revenue leaders say about AI's true ROI. And this is going to go in and provide a little different angle. I'm looking forward to talking to Curtis about it. So Curtis Schroeder, I just a little bit about him. He's currently a head of research and insight at Varicent, where he studies the best of the ways that sales and marketing can impact growth. He's done a lot of great research, not just at Varicent, but just wider in his academic career. So prior to Varicent, he was at Oracle for 8 years. He spent some time with Gartner. He has a PhD in marketing and sales from Oklahoma State, a BA and a master's from Baylor, all focused on sales and marketing. So he's the guy when it comes to really digging in and understanding what's going on with sales and marketing. Really glad to have you on, Curtis.
Well, thanks. When you describe it like that, Seth, I don't know if it's a great thing or if I'm a glutton for punishment when it comes to all this sort of stuff. But I just love the sales and marketing discipline and love thinking about how we can apply our research and data more intentionally to help revenue leaders grow. So excited to be on. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, it's awesome. It's yeah. So I get to talk to you fairly often, so I know firsthand based on some of the conversations we have. There's lots of good stuff for us to talk about. So let's jump in and just could you tell me a little bit about the report, kind of what caused you to write it and what you were trying to learn by doing it?
Yeah, so everybody's doing some sort of that's in the research area. We're all trying to understand AI, and oftentimes when you're maybe this is your case or those that are listening's case, but it's like you read about different use cases, you read about how excited or what the mandates of AI are, or we're starting to get into effectiveness of AI. But I started thinking about maybe what are some different angles that we can look at AI, and in particular in the revenue area and in go-to-market strategy. And I was just trying to dissect that a little bit. And what I noticed was that most AI in revenue research kind of lumps AI together. And that's where kind of my first thoughts came. And then, so we're looking at adoption or we're looking at perception of AI, but we're not really breaking out what kinds of AI, the differences in the kinds of AI that deliver the business value that we're looking for. And so when I was starting to break this down a little bit, I was having some interviews with senior revenue leaders and kind of getting their thoughts on this, and then thinking, hey, let's go study this more. But what I started to realize that I believe that AI for revenue organizations isn't really one market. It's two, and maybe even more downstream as we understand it more. But the way I've kind of categorized this is that you have seller level AI, which are the kinds of tools that boost individual productivity, right? Like the way that we summarize calls, the ways that we draft emails, all these kinds. Very good things that we tried to do to get our sales teams to be 10% better individually. But then there's this whole other category of what I have kind of termed system level AI. It's the things that we use AI for to make the organization at large smarter. Like, how are we actually using AI to inform decision making and for our forecasting and for designing of our territories and modeling and thinking about incentives and other kinds of plans and structures that we bring into our organization. So we wanted to look at whether leaders kind of understood or saw the difference between those two things, how they perceived them, how they were investing. And that really was where we started. And the rest that came out of that was just kind of out of that basic hypothesis that maybe there's a different way of thinking about AI for the revenue organization.
Yeah, it really is different, right? And nobody really looks at it. I would say 99% of what people think is AI is seller AI. That's what everyone seems to be talking about. So it was really compelling to read the report and get a different perspective. So obviously you work for Varicent. Varicent has a very system level AI kind of focus. You guys do amazing stuff in that area. You also do some seller level stuff, so to be fair, but like when you do a report like this, I mean, we've talked enough to know that academic rigor is probably more important than the place you work. So tell me a little bit more around how you avoided bias in building this out.
Well, I think I'm actually really glad that you called this out, because I think it's easy and natural and warranted in many cases why there would be bias involved in any research that's sponsored by a vendor that kind of have its own flair. So I'd be disingenuous if I didn't acknowledge that, of course, we're thinking about things in the way that we view the world to some extent, right? But to some extent, that's what shaped maybe there is a different way of thinking this than other people are talking about it. So there was kind of a uniqueness to that. But I'll say that my academic background and the way that I've approached research from the beginning of my career 10, 12 years ago was, thinking about how do we not come to problems with bias, but with the curiosity that we need to unpack what's happening. And certainly what we have done in this report is not the academic rigor of trying to understand causality or try to get at some sort of deeper longitudinal relationship between different things. We're doing market research in this to understand perceptions and getting more of a descriptive view, right? But I think there's still a lot of meaning and value that can come at that. And the way that I tackle these problems is truly saying, I've got a thought that there is a different way of thinking about it. And sure, it is a way that maybe our go-to-market kind of supports in many ways, but I think what we found in the report is I let the data tell the story, right? Like I'm not here trying to manipulate outcomes to say something that's not true. But when we kind of found this meaningful difference between seller level and system level AI, there seemed to be some richness there that might help us think about our worlds smarter. And you'll notice too, if you read the report, we don't really talk about technology. I mean, AI is technology, right? But we're not talking about technology solutions. My role, and what I'm really grateful for the way that Varicent has invested in this way is that the I don't sit in sales. I don't sit in marketing. My job is to think about how revenue leaders can get smarter with data and bring new insights into their organization. So I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly pressure testing these ideas. And really that's what I'd like to say is the basis of the research that I enjoy doing is how can I just have more intelligent conversations with smart people who are responsible for these big functional areas and help them get even smarter and hopefully along the way find some things that help us all do our work better.
Yeah, so I mean, like thinking about the way you're talking about this, you set the frame of seller level. It was kind of a hypothesis, seller level versus system level, and you set the report out. You had no idea what the answers are going to be when you came back. So that's what happened with it. So whatever comes back is what that's
right.
it.
Exactly. We let the data tell the story, right? Like I really am a big believer in let's let the data say what it's going to say, and we'll find the insights along the way that are meaningful or interesting, but don't want to manipulate it in any way to just fit a point of view.
Cool. So let's dive into the data a little bit. Yeah. So one of the key data points was a comparison that you did a comparison that only 5.3% of leaders believe the highest future ROI from AI investments will come from seller tools. And 80% believe that it's going to come, that the system level is the right approach. So I'm assuming these leaders are decision makers as well. So if 80% of them believe that that's the right approach, then who's telling them no to buying these tools? Because they're not buying them, but they believe that it's the right tool.
Yeah, this was interesting because again, in the spirit of let the data tell the story, I didn't really know what to expect here, and there could have been a very natural, hey, we know that there's a lot of value here, and this is where we're heavily investing. I like it when there are the paradoxes of where we think high value is or where we think there's problems and where like our behavior and our actions tell a different story. Like I love exploring those gaps in there. And to me, the strategic disconnect here, the data doesn't tell the whole story. So what I like to do in these scenarios is then once I have an idea like this, where we say, hey, where are you investing? Where are we thinking that today's greatest value is as dictated by where our dollars and cents are going, where our strategy is going, and then that perception of where we think there's value in the future. Then I saw that gap and then went to interviews. And I just basically said, like, help me understand why is this happening? What's your reaction to this? So we spoke with dozens of leaders just about that piece of it. Like what aspect, what does that tell us? And really what came out of it was we all have these mandates for AI. And in particular, as revenue leaders have shorter and shorter timelines for their seat and role to deliver value, they're being pushed to drive these more strategic AI initiatives, but they need to do things that are visible, that are clear, that in some sense are proven, and even if it's not that maybe the highest potential, right? And so when I think about that, I talked to a senior revenue leader that was saying something along the lines of like, look, I've got this pressure on me to deliver. it's easier for me to show almost tomorrow if I can plug in a tool that a salesperson can take and use to go get better insight into a meeting that they can have this week. And I can hear from the seller that I've done something meaningful to summarize my notes or to gather a strategic insight and then deliver a more compelling message. Like, right. Like, so there's something like that, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that that insight or that productivity that they gained is meaningfully moving the deal forward, or it's going to deliver a high level ROI in the short term, right? Like, it's going to make that seller individually productive, visibly productive in the short term. But what's the big bang payoff? Now, when they started talking about some of these other things, yeah, if I could find a way to segment my territories more intelligently so that I'm applying kind of a system level thinking to how much potential is in a territory for that we're projecting for revenue, and how much quota do we apply to that territory, and then how many sellers do we need to cover in a particular geographic area, for example, or whatever. Like, you're thinking more intelligently and using AI to help structure your organization. That's something you're going to do in a planning process that you might be able to roll out in a month or 2 months. But it also might be something that you're not going to see the real impact until 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road, depending on the length of your sales cycles and the complexity of your buying process, right? So it's one of those things there's just a lot when you're simultaneously getting pressure to invest and deliver, and there are some short-term low-hanging fruit on the vine that you can grab and say, like, I'm doing that thing, we're making some progress. It may not be the most meaningful progress. That seems to be just where folks are gravitating for, even though they see the value maybe deeper in the other category.
I mean, to a certain extent, it's basically, we're in this weird world where everyone wants to do AI and prove that they're doing AI, and the seller approach just demos better. To the executive goes wow to that one, and they don't kind of get the nuances of the bigger approach, even though the people on the front line doing the work every day are saying, yeah, this is pretty valuable for me.
That's right. Well said. Well said.
Interesting. Okay, so I found the question around barriers to implementing AI to be the most insightful data point from this report. So also, when I look at it, so in this report, like 44% said human skepticism was the biggest barrier, but then you also had another 35% saying that adoption improved basically after you made them, not like the person using it didn't think they were using it. So you have this, which, by the way, those two things are completely counter to what we just talked about around executives. So the executives want to see all the AI, and the best way to implement it in a team is to not see the AI.
Right.
So, like, that also seems to be a point in favor of the systemic approach, because if I'm implementing it, that is, by and large, I don't have to worry about adoption per se from the seller. I just need to implement the tool, and it's going to be a small group of people that are doing that. Like,
yeah.
How do you guys think about that? Because that's like, and how do you talk about it? Like, how do you help someone understand this part of it? Because you seem to have all of the positives of the impact, which most people talk about being the right thing to do, but a lot of negatives in the, wow, it doesn't look really cool type bucket.
Well, and that to me is, I mean, there's a maturity curve with AI that we're all currently right in the middle of as well. And there's the hype of Chat GPT, and I'm using it to plan my European vacation and plan my diet and shopping list for the week and all these kinds of things that, like, we can see so many like practical examples of its use case in our personal lives, which certainly then translates into how we use it for work and that sort of thing. But when you're using it depending on your organization and your sales process and cycle times, these kinds of things, like, there's some pretty serious decisions that you could be asking your AI to help inform, that there's just a level of discomfort, it seems, still, and trust that we struggle with. And I think that's the human skepticism side of this, that just says, like, do I really, it's one thing to say that my gut or my experience is telling me that this is how we should approach it, or this very objective data point, very simplistic objective data point, and maybe helps us see something historically that happened and make a decision for the future. But it's different when we have to use more complex models and things that are less understood to us, because we're not all data scientists and AI specialists, and we're kind of trusting an output that we don't really understand how we got there, right? Like, I was thinking about this, even I was talking to a friend earlier today about certain things in our lives where, 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's like we had to learn how to do the long division. And when you're doing the long division, there's a trust that comes with, I know how these steps were done to get to that answer. And AI kind of masks the long division for us in a lot of ways. But that's where the real value is when it's done well. So I guess the way I'd summarize it, I'd say, I think we're learning that the success of AI depends less on the model and more on managing trust and adoption at its core. But going back to something that I mentioned earlier, organizations that see and are able to start to kind of separate AI into the seller level and system level, it becomes a strategic choice to say, am I more inclined, or do I see the greater value in trying to get individuals 10% better at what they do, helping them be more productive, but also recognizing the risk of I've got to get them trained on tools. I've got to get new process into their workflows. They may have individual skepticism and lack of trust with the AI and tools, depending on generational cohorts or other things, right? There's a lot of risk inherent to try to get each of your individual sellers to up level by 10%. But if I can invest in a system level type capability, that compounding growth, which was again the title of the article, was we get that 10% at the decision making level, and that 10% has a compounding benefit for everybody and they don't even know that necessarily the decisions that were made on their behalf or to help them be more successful use AI to get there, right? So I think overall, there's going to be a maturity and a learning curve where we start to trust this more as kind of we come off the hype of what we see in the hallucinations of our AI and those kinds of things that taint the way that we view the outputs. But the organizations that are doing this well are the ones that are figuring out how do we inject this into our ecosystem and not just depend on individuals as the ways to activate.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you almost need the bubble to burst in terms of the AI bubble in order for people to realize the value of the systemic approach and what can be provided. So if the market turns back to an ROI focus, that puts those types of products in really good stead.
It does. And I will say that's the constant battle for vendors like Varicent and others that are trying to do that kind of work is that it is always hard to quantify ROI and to capture the attribution of that kind of work to revenue outcomes. It is the name of the game. But I think there's a logic that I think we're starting to see too, that if we can make smarter decisions, if we can speed up planning cycles, because we all know that planning is no longer an annual cycle that we all walk through. We are constantly having to adjust to market shifts and introducing new products mid-year and reductions in force or growth in our sales force, like those kinds of things that are happening just all over the place now, unless more frequently. We've got to be able to do that better, and that making smarter decisions faster that help us build confidence and drive those outcomes. I think we can make those logical connections to the ROI.
Awesome. Well, I mean, it's a great report. We'll put it in the notes of the podcast. Curtis, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to some key pieces. There's even more if you dig into the report. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Appreciate it.